Hello and welcome. Today we have a full game analysis, continuing my series of analyzing games from a recent tournament I played, Bošnjaci Open, and here we have round 6. So previously in round 5 it was an insanely long game. This was on the same day, so we had the morning round 5 and then in the afternoon round 6, and I was paired against very strong FIDE master Marin Grgantov, and it was not a very long game, but hopefully you still find it instructive. And not to spoil the result, let's just jump into the game. So he opened with e4, I played e6, the French defense, because I wanted to play the most solid possible line that I know, which I'm going to demonstrate in a second. So d4, d5, and I saw that against this he plays knight d2, the Tarrasch variation. And against this I have a small bit of preparation, which goes take, take, knight d7, and after g3, which I saw that he plays almost exclusively, I prepared a little idea, b6, bishop g2, and now rook b8. And the simple idea is that I also want to challenge that diagonal, but I don't want to deal with any discoveries here. These are very dangerous, so I'm just getting out of the way. And this is commonly played in such a way, where I'm going to go bishop b7 and then knight f6, and just get pieces out in a very solid and stable way. Maybe try to go c5. So I believe this is called the Rubinstein variation, where you go here knight d7 with the idea of knight f6. And if you get in c5, you're doing well. That's all I know, and it's a very solid position, kind of hard to lose, let's say. So I wanted to play such a position since I was absolutely exhausted from the morning round. So I intentionally went into this. Knight f3 was played. My opponent seemed a little bit shocked by my move rook b8 here, or at least his time usage said so, because after, let's say, about 6 minutes of thinking, he chose knight f3, which already put me in a bit of a good mood, because I was like, maybe he wasn't expecting this, you know? But I just continue normally, bishop b7 development. Queen e2 was played to defend the knight here, and knight g f6. So the point of this knight d7 is that when I go knight f6, after takes, I could recapture with the knight itself. And instead of with the queen, where I get under some tempo and so on. So that's in some similar variations, just to show that, because some of you might play this. Knight f6 is already a little bit inaccurate, because after this, you don't really want to take with the queen here, because after knight f3, you're going to have to spend the move on playing h6, not to allow them to develop with the tempo. And you're kind of wasting a lot of time here. So for that reason, it's much more safe, solid, and stable to first play knight d7, so that against any normal logical move, you're going to go knight f6. If he takes, you take with knight, and everything's fine. Excuse me. So here we have a slight difference, because now both our bishops are fianchettoed. So I noticed that after knight f6, when he takes, I didn't just automatically recapture with the knight, although I know that that's the move in some other variations. I actually independently looked at what I'm going to take with. So I did that here before I played knight f6. I was like, okay, if he takes, what am I recapturing with? And I decided that queen takes is now completely fine, with the calculation behind it being that after knight f6, knight takes, queen takes f6. Why do I prefer that? Because I have a little bit of pressure on what's now a pin. I'm also putting pressure on the d-pawn, now that the queen has left d1, so some things have changed and I'm adapting. And why does the same bishop g5 not bully my queen right now? Because I have a counter tactic. So as a bit of a visualization exercise, you can pause the video if you're an intermediate player or advanced player, and you can tell me, why does knight f6, queen f6, bishop g5 lose for white? I'm spoiling the solution in 3, 2, 1. The idea is that I can now go bishop takes this knight on f3, and if he simply recaptures, then I just take queen takes bishop. And if he tries to take my queen, I take his queen. He tries to take my bishop, I take his piece, and I have 2 minor pieces, he has 1. For those of you that weren't able to follow along, I'm going to showcase the same thing on the board. So after knight f6, queen f6, bishop g5 is now a blunder. Why? Because I can remove the defender. So bishop takes knight, and if he simply follows my idea and recaptures, I get a free piece. Let's say like this, and bishop is captured. And if he tries to do some in-between move type things, so let's say he takes my queen, I would take his queen, And now there's nothing better than to just follow and be down a piece. He could throw this one more in between with bishop g7, but again, he's going to be down a piece. So for that reason, I chose to take with the queen, because I liked how my knight is still supporting my main break of c5, stopping some sort of knight e5. I mean, not stopping because of that, because that's a pin, so that's what stops knight e5. But when he unpins by, let's say, castling, he's still going to have troubles playing knight e5. So I liked this better than knight takes f6, although knight f6 there's nothing wrong with, concretely speaking, but I preferred to play this position. Using the tactical moment that this is not available because of this, as we saw. My opponent castled, and I played bishop d6. Normal development, nothing fancy. Again, bishop g5 fails to bishop takes f3. He played bishop e3, normal logical development, and I decided to finish development by castling. So now we have entered this middle game, which is slightly imbalanced in pawn structure, and we're both well developed, everything's fine in terms of tactics. I only have an undefended knight on d7, but he can't seem to exploit that. If he attacks it, I just, defend it, no worries. I have a special eye out, keep a special eye out for undefended pieces, generally speaking. And he plays rook a1, and now I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to be doing now, right? So I know that I'm supposed to try to go c5, but now he just played this rook a1 with a very clear idea of stopping my plan of c5. And the reason that stops it is because when he takes whatever I take back with, he's going to take the other thing. So after c5, this will just be blundering a piece due to takes, and I take with a bishop, he takes my knight. I take with a knight, he takes my bishop. So I will be losing a piece there. So for that reason, I'm not able to go for this plan. Now, how do both of us know that I'm supposed to go for this? Just prior experience or knowledge of pawn structures. So this is the typical triangle structure that comes from many different openings. Caro-Kann, Scandinavian, London, Jobava London, many openings this can come from. But usually it's typical that this pawn is at c6. So let me just play some moves just to illustrate that. What I mean by triangle, this. Now, my pawn doesn't actually have to be on c6, it could also be at c7, and that doesn't really change the plans. So the plans for both sides are as follows in this structure. Black is trying to go either e5 or c5 with a pawn break. Why are they trying to do that? Because white currently has a space advantage. A very small one, but a space advantage. How do you recognize a space advantage? Just by comparing how far the pawns are advanced. So notice white has a 4th rank pawn, but black does not have any 4th rank pawns of their own, counting from their side. So if we get in this trade, this pawn for this pawn, or this pawn for this pawn, that will be beneficial to neutralize the small space advantage that white has. So that's the simple explanation of why these pawn breaks are useful and why black tries to equalize the position by going for one of these. Also, potentially, the d4 pawn can sometimes become a weakness, especially if white has committed to the move c4, so that they cannot go c3. So I've also seen the structure with c4 included, where black sometimes tries to actually overpower white on the d4 square, removing some defenders, adding attackers, and so on. So I've seen maneuvers like rook d8, g6, bishop f8, bishop g7 before, in very similar positions, and then, let's say, take, and you take here with the knight or whatever. Your queen is not usually in front. That's kind of bothering me right now. But yeah, just to illustrate typical patterns when it comes to plans, it's worthwhile to know these things. If you're wondering where you can learn more, you can always research chess books or coaches that can teach you the typical plans of each structure. But what you should know, what I can teach you right now, is that plans are already pre-made according to the structure. So you don't have to imagine a new plan. Every pawn structure, every common pawn structure has its own plans already predetermined, and our pieces simply act out those plans, either progressing our own plan by supporting it and defending it, or stopping the opponent's plan. So we already mentioned what is white supposed to be sort of going for, so they have a space advantage. That means that they should try to attack, and also their pawn chain will indicate kingside attack, so they want to go kingside. Now, that might change because my opponent here fianchettoed the bishop. This bishop is much more commonly placed on d3, but this is known to be a completely okay sideline to play. So, yeah. This is how to think about the middle game, essentially. So coming back to the game, rook a d1. he stops my c5. Now I could have just played rook fd8 to re-threaten c5, let's say. But I chose a different idea, which is also an idea I've seen before. I chose the move b5, which looks very strange at first, but I'm just kind of stopping c4. I'm also using the tactical moment that he cannot take this one because I take the knight here with the discovered attack on the queen. So tactically this is protected, but not directly. And I'm just getting space on the queen side. Just why not? So when you're in the middle game, all you should seek is tiny improvements of your position. That's it. I saw this as an improvement. I'm also appreciating the downside. With most pawn moves, the clear downside is that you're not covering the squares that you were previously protecting. So I also have to watch out. I can't just play a pawn move just because I feel like it. I also have to appreciate the downside. These squares are now much weaker. So potentially he can reroute the knight into this now outpost. But I thought that I have enough piece control over the square not to be, so that it doesn't become a problem later. So knight d2 was played, offering a trade of bishops. I accept, why not, weakening the king a bit long term. And again, I'm looking for a tiny improvement to my position. So moves that come to mind are like, let's say a5, let's say rook d8, including the last piece, let's say knight b6, including the knight into some better squares. I think c5 wasn't working for some reason, let me remember. Oh, right, so c5 failed to knight e4, a very concrete tactic. Again, this is a move I want to play because if he just takes, I take back, I get slightly more piece activity, and I can maybe utilize the open c file to hit some weaknesses and so on. So let me just show you if this works, why is this beneficial for me? Let's say that he misses knight e4. We're going to talk about what knight e4 is in a second, but just to illustrate the benefits, let's say he takes, take. Why is this good for me? So first of all, there's no more center control by white. They don't have any more center pawns. I do. Center pawns are slightly better than side pawns in general, but I want to illustrate this situation because this is a classic minority attack where you create weaknesses in your opponent's camp and you just go and attack those weaknesses until you take over. So let's say he plays like c3 to stop queen b2, and now I would maybe go a5, b4 with the idea of creating some weaknesses that I could attack. For example, if my opponent is not careful, after a4, let's say a3, I just go b4. Let's say takes. And now this pawn is all alone here, so it's a target for my attack. And because it's not advanced at all, it's more of a weakness than it is a strength. If this pawn were somehow defended on, I don't know, b5, my rook was back here, he had a rook behind it, then it could be, there's an argument to be made that this is a passed pawn. That's a very strong pawn, which forces me into a passive position and so on. But here it's clear that black is the one pushing for winning a pawn and entering a better endgame. So this is the idea of a minority attack. I also have a video on my channel where you can learn more about the minority attack, but you essentially use less pawns to attack more pawns. That's why it's called minority attack, in hopes of creating a weakness. So if I trade 2 for 2 in any way, shape or form, these two for these two, these two for these two, the remaining one must become an isolated pawn, which I'm just going to stack up with all my pieces. So just to illustrate another benefit of this c5, so trading this for this creates a 2 versus 3 where a minority attack becomes available. Hopefully that makes sense. Whereas e5 as a break is less decisive result because we're trading this for this, so the remaining structures will be just 3 versus 3 on both sides. So that's something to kind of consider when you're wondering which one to go for, and if both tactically work, then it's like, am I going for, you know, a decisive result? Am I going to play for the win and possibly risk a loss as well? Or am I just going to play it safe? Depending on what kind of player you are, depending if you're playing the World Championship and you just need a draw, whatever, you're going to choose accordingly. So here, I just played Queen f5, which is one of the best moves. Point is that I just put a little bit of pressure here, and I also threaten Queen d5 with a fork, potentially, not 100%, because he might have Rook a1, Rook a7 ideas and so on. But it's just nicer to have my queen on f5 light squares, since the light squares are weakened, than f6, where I'm just attacking a pawn that's pretty much going to be rock solid. So queen f5, just a small improvement. Knight b3, a5 played. Point of a5 is that if he takes, I would go rook a8, and once he goes back, I go rook takes a2. And I'm trading off the a pawns in such a way to improve also activity greatly. So now I force him into a passive position. I have the a file, so this is advantageous to me, and I'm just gonna try to activate and target some of these pawns and hopefully win a pawn and enter a better endgame. That's how these positions with same-side castling usually end up. It's going to be about who takes a pawn on the queen side or something like that. You're never going to see much of all-out attacks, because whoever starts pushing these pawns will seriously weaken their king long-term. So a5, just tiny little bit of space. A lot of players make the mistake of doing something like too committal, like instantly going for a pawn break as soon as it works, but there's no need to rush. So often you just make tiny improvements to your position and wait for your opponent to make a mistake. That's it. So a5. He played c3, just strengthening the pawn chain, good move, and making it so my queen is not hitting the weak pawn anymore, so his queen is free to go anywhere. a4, a little bit more space. Knight to c1, and e5. Now, there's a couple of ways to play this position, but again, my job was literally just to play it a little bit safer than I otherwise would, because I was very aware of the fact that I'm exhausted, so I can't play my absolute best chess and play for the win as I would like to. It's not just any game, it's the afternoon game after a long game, and I know that I'm just not there. Half of these moves I couldn't even visualize deeper than 3-ply, just my head wasn't in the game, so I decided to, let's say, bail out by making that equal-ish trade that I talked about. So instead of playing for the decisive pawn trade where I have imbalanced pawn structure, I can leverage the imbalance and do something, instead I choose the more, let's say, safer approach. By the way, it's worth mentioning c5 again doesn't work tactically, because I have lineups on the d file here, some undefended pieces, so c5 would again be a blunder because of d takes c. If I take with the knight, he takes my bishop. If I take with the bishop, he takes the knight. But if I wanted to play for this, I could have. I just had to preempt it with rook d8, which is fine. So for that reason, I chose e5 here, fully understanding that it's an equal position, but it's probably going to be a draw. I just have slightly more space, but all things are equal. So d takes, knight takes. He played bishop f4, and after knight to c4, we agreed to a draw. I'm not sure who offered, doesn't really matter too much, but normally I'm a big fan of playing for the win and just going for it and not taking draws in positions like this where it's just like equal and we have a game to play. But again, I have to emphasize that this was a tournament decision. If this was the last game of the tournament or something like that, where I could just go home after, no worries, but I had 3 more rounds to go, so I had to conserve some energy. So after knight c4, I was just done with it, let's say, and just accepted the draw and said, okay, we got games tomorrow, and let's move on. As if I had to play this on, it would be probably equal. So let's say he takes, I would take back with the knight, not to spoil my structure for no reason. And yes, I do have some extra space on the queen side. Yes, his king is a little bit less safe than mine, but I still think objectively this is not enough to win. Furthermore, this could maybe be weaknesses sometimes. It's not clear that the extra space is beneficial to me, because the space only takes away a couple squares from the knight, and that's about it. So this could easily turn into some weaknesses if he goes active and somehow activates his pieces. Let's say queen d3, maybe I could take, maybe I could go back, that's up to me. Let's say that I really wanted to win the game, so I don't want to really trade for no reason. Let's say I went to queen f6 or something, he would just activate all of his pieces, rook f1, and sooner or later I would have to challenge these files leading to massive trades. And I also have to watch out for this. This is not the most solid structure of all time. So like he could easily sneak his queen here and put some pressure on me while I'm struggling to attack his pawns. So this could be double-edged, of course, but yeah, would have been interesting to see it played out. All in all, we agreed to a draw here and a peaceful result going into round 7. Hopefully that was still instructive. There were some instructive moments of how to improve your middle game. So when there's nothing happening tactically, when you're not under threat, what's the thought process? So just tiny improvement to your position, hopefully non-committal move. And the other instructive moment, I feel, was the realization that plans in chess are based on pawn structure, and the pieces simply act out those plans. Those two are the main takeaways for today. And if you have any questions about the game or about chess in general, feel free to drop it in the comments down below. We're going to end the video here. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon. Have an awesome week, and take it easy.